What about issues regarding the status of tax payments on the property? Are there issues that can arise there?
Taxes are probably the most frequent title claims that arise with title on closings. They're always a big issue. The first thing that the title company settlement agent will do is order from a third party something called a tax certificate that shows what the current status is on the tax payment on the property. It will show what exemptions affect the property, such as a homestead exemption. And then that's something that actually, my suggestion is every buyer asks for a copy of that. They rarely get offered that up front, but you certainly should ask for it. Now, the major issues that I've seen arise on taxes a lot of times relate to over 65 sellers. Being over 65 myself, I know the over 65 exemption that our government gives us is significant. So the taxes for anyone over 65 that is applied for that exemption, they get a huge discount on their taxes. But if a seller is over 65 and a buyer is under 65, the buyer is not entitled to that exemption. So there's a tug right there about how you're going to prorate the taxes. In other words, the part of the year that the seller owns it and the part of the year that the buyer owns it, which basis are you going to prorate? The lower basis or the higher one? But more than importantly than that is I've seen where people buy, particularly investors, buy properties from the children or the heirs of a deceased over 65 person. Okay, so on that, anyone over 65 is entitled to the exemption, but the minute that the person passes away, that exemption, the entitlement to that exemption goes away. The problem is the tax jurisdictions, they have no way of knowing that that person has passed away until something is filed of record. And a lot of times heirs or children will sit there and own the property, sometimes even for years, okay, and just continue to pay the then current rate at over 65, even though they weren't entitled to it, okay? So what happens then is we come to closing, and if the title settlement agent doesn't really know what he or she is doing, and I've seen that numerous times, they just deal with the current tax situation. Well, then the deed from this closing gets recorded, and at that point there either has to be some sort of affidavit of heirship or probate recorded that shows the date that the person who did have the exemption passed away. It may take a few months, but the tax jurisdiction will eventually go back, that'll hit them, and they'll go back and they'll reassess the property back to the date that the person passed away, and then send the buyer, the current owner of the property, a new bill for the difference.
A surprise bill.
A surprise bill. So that is one of the biggest issues I deal with, because I deal with a lot of investors that buy properties that were probate or heirship properties. And I even had one client that, for whatever reason, she went and closed with another title company. When she bought it, she was an investor, she bought it. The title agent there didn't handle it correctly. Then, because the title agent, in that situation, it's up to the title agent to recognize the issue and to go and find out what the amount of taxes should be before closing and collect them. So that didn't get done. So then my client went and improved the property, rehabbed it, then 9 months later got ready to sell it. Went to another title company other than me, which I'm again not sure exactly why, but anyway, went to another title company, and then they say, oh, well, you owe an additional $4,000 in taxes before you can sell it. So then she comes to me, and so I, at that point, as her attorney, had to make a claim on her title policy, which I did, and we got her money back, but it was not easy. So that's a big issue. The other issues that can come up on taxes is if you buy a house, I believe, like you just did, you bought a house that was just recently built. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Right. So the tax value possibly for the prior year was just the lot value. But then now that the house is built, the tax value is a lot higher. Now that comes to play in connection with prorating the taxes. If it's the first 9 months of the year, we don't know what the current taxes for that year are gonna be until October. So we just have to go by what the taxes were for the prior year. Well, they were artificially low because it was only based upon lot value. So if you prorate just on that number, then the buyer, take a hit, okay, from the proration. And then the last thing that taxes can really bite you is more on a commercial type transaction where the sellers have owned it for a number of years and have what's called an agricultural exemption. And that really, that exemption is fantastic if you can get it, because you really are paying practically nothing until the property is, the usage is changed. Well, so someone comes in, a commercial buyer comes in, buys the property, and then the usage changed. And again, the tax jurisdictions it's not immediate, but they get around to sending you a bill, and they can go up to 5 years prior at the full value. Okay, so those are things you just have to make sure that you know who you're dealing with as far as your settlement agent, that they really know what they're doing, or it can really come back to really bite you.